Okay, so now for tonight's guest, Professor Ken Stein. He's a professor emeritus at Emory University, where he taught courses on the history and politics of the Middle East and Israel from 1977 until his retirement in 2024. Professor Stein was the director of the Carter Center at Emory University from 1983 to 1986, advising former President Carter on Middle East-related issues. In 1998, he founded the Institute for the Study of Modern Israel, also at Emory, and at the time it was the first, well, it still is the first, I suppose, permanent US institute or center established exclusively for the study of modern Israel. Through ISME, as it is known on the Emory campus, Ken brought numerous guest professors to campus, and I was fortunate to be one of them. I was there for 2 years. It was great. In 2008, Ken founded the Center for Israel Education, whose mission is to educate broadly about Israel from its Jewish historical origins to contemporary Zionism. Under Ken's leadership, the Center for Israel Education has since grown dramatically. It has engaged thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands by now, of learners in multiple countries in several languages, and it offers a very impressive repository of primary documents about Israel on its website. And I think he's going to show us that website, but we'll wait and see what happens. I would just say that I and many other professors use that website regularly. It's really a wonderful resource. As you can probably imagine, this isn't the first time in my career that I have the privilege of hosting Professor Ken Stein, but this makes it no less exciting. We always learn something new from you. Now, I've known him for nearly 20 years, and somehow he has a lot more energy now than he used to have 20 years ago, and one day I'll ask you for the secret for this. But until that happens, please all join me in welcoming Professor Ken Stein.
After introducing Jimmy Carter on several occasions in the 80s, and lauding the 39th president and the things that he did, I would finish, and his immediate remark, as my immediate remark after Professor Ayalon, of all the introductions I've received, that's the most recent. We've agreed tonight that I would speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then retire to the chairs, and no longer Dr. Ayalon or Professor Ayalon. Yaron will, and I will engage in some discussion. He'll ask some questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for your questions too. We planned this 4 months ago. I have to say Yaron's timing was pretty good, given what we've now witnessed in the last 14 days
I knew about it.
in the Middle East.
I knew about it for me.
Well, for a man with perspicacity, regrettably he got his PhD from Princeton, but we'll accept it. I want to spend a little bit of time before I jump into the contemporary and maybe some Q&A from your own. First, to say thank you to Fairfield University. This is at least the second time I've been here. Second, my Emory University colleague who used to direct the Bennett Center, Ellen Umansky, was a great colleague of mine at Emory, a wonderful, wonderful teacher. I'm glad I wrote a letter of recommendation for her back then. and I'm glad I wrote a letter of recommendation for your own now. The Bennett Center is a terrific place for learning about Jewish studies, Jewish history, and modern Jewry in general, including the State of Israel. So I think you're all fortunate to be in the hands of someone who is relatively young and is about as dynamic a person in terms of planning as one can possibly be. I was delighted to have known for many years his father and his mother. His father was, of course, a great teacher at Tel Aviv University in Middle Eastern history. To set the context of today, I want you to gaze at the map. And the reason for that is there's some things about this region that haven't changed since October 7th, 2023, haven't changed since Moses went through Sinai. The most basic is its geography, its location in relation to the rest of the world. It's a place that you need to pass through in order to get to some other place. It doesn't have the water courses of the United States or Europe that allows people to transit the region real easily. You have to go over deserts and mountains in order to get from the Mediterranean elsewhere. The fact that the Suez Canal was built in 1869, Egypt was occupied by the British from the early 1880s. It became the treasure of the Middle East for European powers in their competition with the Soviet Union, with Russia. Russia still has this great desire to get out of the Black Sea, find its way into the Mediterranean. That's why it wants to have assurances from the new leader in Syria that will have its bases along the Mediterranean coast. The Suez Canal still has a great relevance. It's 106 miles long. You have to go through the canal in order to get to the Red Sea, in order to get around the Horn of Africa, in order to get to India. That geography, that location will not change. Subsequent, in the last 200 years, it's the geology underneath the sands of the Middle East that have determined a new level of power and the exercise of power, namely petrodollars, petrowealth. You can deny Iran a nuclear capability, but you can't deny its capacity. Iran will still earn $38 billion this coming year, and it can use those funds for whatever purposes it wants, whether good, bad, or nefarious. In other words, the geology and the geography still determine how we look at this region of the world. Now, the third, of course, the third major factor, element, variable that has shaped the region is, of course, the three monotheistic religions. They all happen to have an epicenter in and around the Holy Land, Palestine, Israel, whatever term you want to use it, over what period of time. Now, those three elements will always be there. They're not going to change. It doesn't matter who runs Egypt. It doesn't matter who the prime minister of the state of Israel is. It doesn't matter if Iran is run by an 86-year-old Ayatollah. Those are realities. So whenever you pick up a newspaper and whenever you look at the Middle East, think of those three realities and try and look at the Middle East through those kind of glasses. It's very, very important. The only other reason I use the map is if you fall asleep or you get bored with what I'm saying, at least you learn some geography. And you'll just have to imagine the geology. And if you want to imagine the religion, you can put your head down and say whatever prayer you want in whatever language. The topography of the Middle East has influenced its geopolitics. Who has resources, who controls them, matters. And the absence of water and the absence of cultivable land in most of the region, with the exception of the Nile River Valley and the Tigris-Euphrates, up until the last 50 or 100 years. The rest of the region basically was focused on individuals who controlled land and individuals who controlled how land was used or how it was abused or how people abused the people who worked the land. That's also a generality that you can stick in the back of your head. Now, I was once told by an advisor to King Hussein, a man who was head of the royal cabinet. His name was Adnan Abu Auda, and Adnan reminded me, he said, remember, Ken, if you left Mecca and you went to Damascus, you didn't know where your water came from. But if you left Maryland and you went to Central Ohio, you had no worry about where your resources were. Controlling of resources is critical for determining the politics and the power of the region. Over time, people depended upon one another and families, clans, and tribes. I will say without equivocation that a long-term bequeathal to the contemporary Middle East are the oligarchs and the autocrats that have dominated the region for the last 250 years. Now, I'm not going back into further into Ottoman times. I could go back into medieval times. I could go back into ancient times. The reason I say that is the region today is controlled by autocrats and oligarchs. Hamas is an oligarchy. Hamas is an autocracy. The Palestinian Authority is an autocracy. It's run by an elite group of few people. You can look at Egypt and you can say, yes, the military has great influence over what happens today, but by and large, it's still the elites that have remained remnants from the revolution that took place in Egypt in the 50s, 60s, down to the present. Israel is an entity that has a historic root that goes back to ancient biblical times, although it's often argued, more often than not, in the Palestinian Arab press that Jews are not indigenous to the region, they have no right to be here, they're usurpers, they've only come since 1948, there's no longevity to Israel's or Zionist presence. I read enough Arabic to know what I'm reading. I'm not fluent in Arabic. If the Arabic language's future were dependent upon my knowledge of Arabic, it would become a dead language very quickly. But I do know enough to know that Israel as an entity is not accepted as a norm by a majority of the Middle Eastern countries. Now, what did Israel learn on October 7th? It learned that it could be recognized by 6 Arab states, and even recognized by the PLO, which recognized Israel's right to exist on September 9th, 1993, when Arafat signed a letter of agreement with Yitzhak Rabin. Israel may be recognized, but it's not fully accepted. I make the same distinction about Jews who live in the diaspora. They may in fact be accepted as equals, and there may in fact be fewer and fewer bars to their success. But on October 7th, something happened that burst onto the scenes that people said, wait a minute, I thought we were equal. I thought Jews were equal in this society. And we found out that some of the best allies that Jews had in North America, for example, were not the best friends. Now, why that happened, why American Jews were surprised, that's 2 or 3 lectures in its own right. Let me speak to the topic of the talk tonight, and that's Israel at 77. Where was the United States in 1853? We were 77 years old. Unless my math is really off, it's about right. We hadn't gone through the Civil War, hadn't gone through the Reform era in the United States, the Progressive era, hadn't gone through 2 world wars, hadn't gone through the Civil War. Women were not yet equal. The United States had not yet finished its deciding what its western border would be. I would also argue to you that Israel at 77 is also unfinished. Israel hasn't figured out the role of religion and state fully. I mean, maybe we haven't figured that out in America after 250 years. Israel certainly hasn't figured out what its borders are. Israel is a society that still very much is in its youth. Now, maybe those of us who look at Israel from afar wish Israel were a mature 68-year-old adult, or someone close to 68. Well, it's not yet mature. And part of its absence of maturity has come from the reality that it lives in a neighborhood that hasn't fully embraced its reality. Now, the state of Israel is referred to in Arabic newspapers as the occupying state. They're not referring to Israel's presence in the West Bank. They're talking about everything from the Jordan River to the sea. So when people march through campuses and they talk about Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, they're really talking about expunging the state of Israel and agreeing with Hamas ideology that essentially says, let's wipe Israel off the map. Now, these are not phrases that Ken has invented. You can go to the israeled.org website, and I'll show it to you in a moment, and you can look at all the speeches that Sinwar and all the Hamas leaders have made and the Iranian leaders have made over the years. How Israel was surprised, why it was surprised, where the responsibility lies, it's a different topic and has a lot more controversy attached to it. But Israel realized at 77, after October 2023, that it could no longer contain its neighbors. It would have to find ways to set back its neighbors' capabilities to threaten the security of the state. Now, it proceeded systematically to go at Hamas, and then Hezbollah, and then in Lebanon, and then with Hezbollah's collapse, it meant the collapse of the Bashar Assad regime. Israel went after Iran with the help of the United States. So Israel, rather than containing its adversaries, decided to create a cordon around the country where it could police the cordon. It also did something similar with the West Bank, though it's a little less unclear to me what exactly it has so far accomplished, although it has accomplished a lot. But Israel was at a 7 or 8 front war. And as a result of this ceasefire, anyone who calls it a peace treaty, anyone who refers to it as, peace is breaking out with the lion and the lamb laying down in the same field together, I want to smoke what you've been smoking, or at least have the 3rd or 4th beer. This is a transaction that fit the needs of both Israel and Hamas. Israel, in a sense, it was war-weary. Israel, in a sense, knew that it could get its hostages back. But Israel also knew it could not tame an ideology, and it could not remove an ideology that finds Israel's very existence as anathema to the ideology that they believe. And if we run this right down to the contemporary, we realize as soon as the ceasefire was declared, as soon as the hostages were returned, Hamas's operatives in the Gaza Strip went about shooting and killing those militias and those family groups and those tribal groups that had been affiliated with Israel, because Hamas does not want to lose control of the power of the land, even if it's only 47% of Gaza. Longevity and control of the land is absolutely critical for Hamas's tomorrow. And you can't tame Hamas from Washington, D.C. We've learned in Arab-Israeli negotiations over time that unless you stay tuned and involved on a day-to-day basis, and you make limitations, you enforce limitations on the adversary, or force limitations on the signatories to an agreement, they will not adhere to the agreement. If you read carefully the agreement that was signed at Sharm el-Sheikh, it is full of wonderful words. Wonderful words. It was signed by the United States, by Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt. Qatar and Turkey, because those are two powerful forces in the Middle East. Egypt, because it wants to be an operative conduit of dollars that will be going into Gaza for reconstruction. Egypt could use whatever injections possible for its economy and for its society. Now, I have given a very broad overview. I spent about 20 minutes. I'm going to stop at this juncture, ask Yaron to join me, and then see if we can pursue some of these points and others even further. Yaron, if you will.
Thank you.
Be right there.
Please. Hi, everyone.
My apologies, I'm only holding my phone so I can keep track of time. I'm not texting while I'm also interviewing Professor Stein. I just wanted to clarify that. So I'm going to start.
I would just wish this were vodka rather than water.
Yeah, sure, of course. We'll make that happen next time you come here. Or afterwards, that's right. So we are now right at the second anniversary of the attacks of October 7th, second anniversary of the war, plus a few days. And let's start with so we have the big picture background that you just wonderfully outlined for us. And now here's the question when we ask, you can easily find these online. People are asked to condemn October 7th, the attacks, like throughout the last 2 years. And they're saying, well, I'm not going to condemn this because you have to understand the context. And there's background, and there have been decades of occupation, and the Nakba of 1948 is still ongoing, and so on and so forth. But let's try to take this question outside of the annoying context of those types of answers and address it seriously, which is, why has it happened? What is the background to it? Other than Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, was a crazy dude who liked to kill people, which he was, but let's try to go beyond that. What is the context, and what do we need to understand? Even if what we understand is stuff we don't really like, we still probably want to understand it. What do we need to know about October 7th, the attack, why it happened, how it happened? What does it teach us?
So what are the lessons learned? Microphone okay? No?
Yeah, it's okay.
Better? Great. So what are the lessons learned? First, if someone says they're going to kill you, I think you ought to believe them. I think you can't kick that can down the road. I think if you believe that there must be an answer to the Palestinian quest for self-rule, don't believe that if you put money in people's pockets and give them an opportunity to work inside Israel coming from the Gaza Strip, that dollars and economic well-being will neutralize their ideology. It was a theory that the Zionists had in the labor movement in the 1930s that was articulated by Burl Katznelson and David Ben-Gurion himself. And you couldn't neutralize then the ideology of people who said, we just don't want you here. A third lesson is you can't manage an opposition that dislikes you or hates you. You have to find a way to reach an accommodation with a side that doesn't like you without impinging on your own security. Now, I'm not certain the answer to that is two states for two people that are living side by side in environments where they're not going to threaten each other. I have always been an advocate of separating the populations. I'm just not sure that two states is the way you do it, at least not immediately. I think the lesson learned is that the Israelis today are further away from accepting this preaching, which they're getting on a daily basis from the international community, that you have to unfold a two-state solution. And I think the lesson learned here is the international community has got to realize that there is no one in the Palestinian world who is capable of governing a state, not now. Not the Palestinian Authority that has 15% of its general population in the West Bank and Gaza perceiving it to be reliable. That means 85% don't. And there's more than 60% of the Gaza population today finds Hamas unacceptable. So preaching a solution from the outside that doesn't have parameters that can be implemented because the people themselves don't want it, and I haven't even talked about the Israeli political system, which has a firm group of 40 to 45% of the population, at least in polling data, that says they don't want to even think about Palestinian self-determination. Another lesson, I think, is I knew the United States was close to Israel. I didn't know that it was this close. And that's not just President Trump, it was President Biden as well. The way the United States as a country behaved in the last 2 years was surprising to me in its actions. Even the restraints that the Biden administration may have put on Israel's military preferences during the first year of the war. I think the last lesson, if I have to think about it, is American Jewry still remains focused on playing defense and fighting anti-Semitism, which is terribly important, and telling the story of the Holocaust, which is terribly important. But less time is spent in inculcating the idea of Zionism and Israel's story into its teens and young adults. And that remains a shortcoming which has not been remedied since October 7th. That's a very long answer. I gave you 6 or 7, your own. You can burrow into any of them if you wish.
I do wish, thank you. And what I'm going to do is press you on one of those points, if I may, which is about the two-state solution. Now, we are both trained as historians, and one of the most annoying things for historians is to be asked to predict the future. Because we're very good at predicting the past, but not so much the future.
We always argue over the past.
Well, sure. But about this point of the two-state solution being dead.
I didn't say it was dead.
No, I'm saying it. And this is the point I'm about to make. I'm going to start with this. My claim is that it's dead, and then I'm going to ask you what you think about this, okay? And here's why. We've had years of Likud governments, mostly led by Netanyahu, who opposed the two-state solution. We have settlers in the West Bank and back in the day also in the Gaza Strip, who have changed reality on the ground very dramatically in a way that would make this almost impossible. And they have done this mostly at the encouragement, or at least with the looking the other way of Israeli governments. And it doesn't matter which government, they all did the same thing. And of course, we have also such radical groups on the other side, like Hamas or Islamic Jihad and a bunch of others, that have no interest whatsoever in any territorial compromise. So hence my claim that that solution is dead, despite what so many international diplomats like to say. So my question is then, so what is the solution? And is it time, perhaps, to start talking about some radical idea in which the same country is shared by more than one group, with equal rights for everyone?
The short answer to your last question is no, because I don't believe the two societies can live together. I don't believe they could live together in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, an area of study that I spent maybe 50 years on. I think the populations need to be separate. They need to be apart. They need to have their own interests. They need to have their own goals and aspirations without threatening the well-being of the other. To go away from the ideologies of the respective sides and to step back and to say, can two peoples coexist west of the Jordan River? The answer is yes. But there has to be a willingness on the part of the respective sides to engage in self-empowerment. Now, why do I use that phrase? In 2003 or 2004, the exact date escapes me, a man by the name of Salam Fayyad was, I want to say, finance minister for the Palestinian Authority. Maybe he had another title.
Before he was prime minister.
And prime minister. Yeah. And Fayyad believed that you had to bring a measure of Western-style accountancy and accountability, and Arafat didn't find that particularly nourishing or personally rewarding as it would be as if Fayyad's philosophy were not there. I think that's a polite way of saying that Arafat was the quintessential kleptocrat, easily. Fayyad said in an interview with a colleague of mine at the Carnegie Endowment, when asked why have the Palestinians not succeeded to date, Fayyad said, we didn't do what the Zionists did in the 30s and 40s. He said they didn't have full control over their own destiny. They only had self-government. They only had autonomy. He said, "We have never believed about self-empowerment. We have always waited for others to help us accomplish our goals." And if one takes a look at the Palestinian history, one finds that their agency and their voice has been regularly usurped, ripped from them by others. The signatories to this agreement, there wasn't a Palestinian signature. The 1948-49 conclusion, the Palestinians weren't allowed to even speak at Lausanne or in Rhodes. There has to be a willingness on the part of Palestinians themselves to take destiny into their own hands if given the opportunity and when they're given the opportunity. And I would argue for something I've never said in public, and I only thought about on the airplane on the way up this morning, and you'll forgive me if it was early in the morning and I wasn't coherent. Palestinians have incredible talent living in the diaspora. They need 1, 2, or 3, or 4 waves of immigration of talented Palestinians in the diaspora who will put their hands up and say, I want to come help run a Palestinian self-rule, whatever that is. It sounds dreamlike, but I think the international community would be prepared to give those individuals a chance to maybe let it unfold. Of course, you have to have Israelis on the other side who are willing to say, yes, we'll have a go of it. But I think you can grow roses in the winter in a greenhouse if it's in a controlled environment. I think you can do the same thing if this truly needs to be nurtured and will be nurtured. There has to be creativity and there has to be volunteerism. I have studied negotiations too long to know that to go from war to a peace treaty, you need to go through 8 or 9 stages. And the first stage is you need to have trust between the sides. Otherwise, you can't even get away from home plate to first base. I'm not certain that in my lifetime I will see the evolution of Palestinian self-rule unless there's a major change in leadership and in leadership style. There's no precluding a Palestinian de Gaulle or Nixon or David Ben-Gurion evolving. Because you and I know as historians, history doesn't follow a linear path. So I wouldn't be surprised by anything. I wasn't surprised by Sadat's visit to Jerusalem, because I'd studied enough of it. This
in
would be
1977.
a major shift. I'm throwing confetti in the air. I don't know where it's going to land.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to ask you one more question, which is going to be a bit annoying, and then we're going to open it up. And my question is about what could we be doing? And it goes back, and I think I mentioned that to you. I don't know how many times in my career you have said something along the following lines to me, which is there's a big difference between what American Jewish scholars or American scholars in general versus Israelis can say when it comes to criticizing Israel.
Criticizing it.
Criticizing, yes.
Yes, right.
When it comes to, what can you say or not say? And I can't, I've lost count of the many times that you told me something along the lines of, well, you can say this, whatever it is that this was. I don't even know if I wanted to say that thing, but he said, you can say this, I can't say that because you're Israeli and I'm not. And my question to you is, if there is even a place where we draw the line, and I'm asking this question because since the war happened 2 years ago, many more people, some in the media that we've seen, but many people that haven't spoken about it publicly, who in general, were supporters of Israel, have seen things that they weren't very happy about seeing, and at some point felt, these guys are doing this in my name, whether I agree with it or not. And I feel very strongly about this. I don't know, maybe they saw pictures in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal of aerial photos of what's left of the Gaza Strip. Maybe they've heard the far-right ministers in Israel, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, talking about the repopulation of Gaza with Jews. And maybe they've seen all of those things, and they say, I live in the diaspora. I don't get to elect Israeli leaders. I don't have a say in that. And normally I see my job as being someone who supports Israel, but maybe now a line has crossed and there's certain things I can no longer do. To clarify, that isn't my position, but I wonder what you have to say about that.
Right, so I wrote myself an email, which I've been composing for a week, and I sent it to myself today, and I'm looking through my notes. I've always maintained that if you want to criticize something, you better know something about what you're criticizing. And I've used the phrase, concretize before you criticize. Oh, I've always believed that it was my duty as a teacher to have people understand the variables of the contemporary Middle East, take that you see fit, but build on it in any way you want. That's essentially what I did in the first 15 to 20 minutes anyway. My first reaction is, I think Americans and American Jews know very little about Israel. I think they know very little about Israelis. Yeah. I think they know very little about how Israel functions or what Israeli society is about. You served in the army, I didn't. What right do I have to tell you what you should do, particularly if you happen to have a son and daughter who may be serving right now? I don't think I have that prerogative. Number two, I think American Jews gave up their memory for knowing who they are and where they came from in favor of assimilation and in favor of telling only a lachrymose story, which essentially was, let's tell you what happened between 1939 and 1945. Yes, it's a story that needs to be told. Yes, you need to fight anti-Semitism wherever you find it. But American Jewish identity found itself in these last 2 years hinged closely to what happened in Israel. If Israel suffered hostages, American Jews suffered hostages. If Israelis congregated at Hostage Square, then American Jews felt that they virtually need to congregate at Hostage Square. The hostages are home. What is American Jewry learning about Israel as a people? And remember, only about a third of American Jews, and here I'm not referring to non-Jews, only about a third of American Jews, and maybe less, have actually visited Israel. So that means of the 6 million who live in this country, 4 million have not. And probably of the 4 million, probably less than 3.6 million have ever learned anything about Israeli history or society. And you can't learn it in the blogs. You actually have to learn. If the Institute for the Study of Modern Israel at Emory University was the first one built in 1998, and the first Holocaust Studies chair was in the late 50s and the 60s, and by the time I was the first chair at Emory University, there were already 45 Holocaust Studies chairs in the United States. What does that say about the focus of attention? Now, you can say it's Arab money, you can say it's Saudi money, you can say it's the gutteries, you can say it's the infiltration in the American academe. I will also put the burden of responsibility on the shoulders of American Jews for abrogating the responsibility to teach their own children about their own story, whether it's American Jewish history, European Jewish history, or Israeli history. Now, they can't take tenure away from me because I'm retired.
Or from me.
Well, we still hope we might be able to get.
Who knows? That's right. Who knows?
Yaron, I think we have to understand that there's diversity in the Jewish world. That there may be 1 million, there may be one tribe, but multiple minions. And we have to be able to tell the non-Jewish world about those realities. American Jewry is different than Mexican Jewry, is different than Chilean Jewry, is different than French Jewry, is different than Australian Jewry. Or even Jewry in Vancouver, Washington. I think American Jews have become lazy about their own history. We are the only Jewish generation that hasn't learned a Jewish language. I think 75% of American Jews don't know a Jewish language.
Good thing we're starting Hebrew here next semester.
And it's not just to know the language, you'll be able to read Amos Oz or Aleph Bet Yehoshua. Did you know that there's no word in Hebrew for accountability?
Din v'cheshbon. But that's 2 words.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's not achrayut.
No, that would be responsibility, not accountability.
Right. And there's a difference.
There is a difference.
All right. So what does etymology teach you? It teaches a little bit about the culture. I'm not saying Jewish politics aren't accountable. Please don't walk away with the wrong impression. Let's take the audience question.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. We do have some time for questions. So please. Philip, yes. Yes. How about I'll just walk around with the mic.
Thank you.
First, Professor Stein, thank you so much and for your service to the people of Israel, to academia. Thank you, Professor, for writing that letter for Ellen Umansky and for Yaron. Toda. Now,
The jury's still out on him.
Meanwhile, in the largest urban environment where several million Jewish souls live today, 55 miles from where we are seated in New York City, an ardent anti-Zionist representing the Democratic Party is the shoo-in for mayor of New York. At the same time, many of us who have been part of the Democratic Party going back to FDR have great concern about which way the wind blows, with Mandami's role as, is this the new Democratic Party? Give us a sense of where you see the wind will blow after November in New York City.
You know, you're asking me about tomorrow. I want to make it to my 80th birthday in July. So that's my major focus right now. Enough money in the 529s for the 6 grandkids for their college. I used to live on Long Island, across the Sound. I've always believed in American institutions and the rubber band theory, that it gets stretched, but usually it snaps back. It could be 20 years, it could be 40 years. People may want to say that about previous Supreme Courts or this Supreme Court. On January 6th, no matter what you think about happened or didn't happen, very few Americans didn't leave the United States. It wasn't like in the late 60s, being at the University of Michigan, where people were running off to Canada all the time. And that was a war that was 7,000 miles away. Americans stayed because I think this was home. Now, did other people start looking for a European passport? And did some people move away consequently? Yes. I still believe in the foundations of this democracy. And I think people who are in fringes ultimately end up becoming self-immolated because systems won't tolerate it. It's looking at the fire in advance that is so threatening. I don't know the direction of the Democratic Party, of the Republican Party. I don't know if this shutdown ends with or without a compromise on health care. But ultimately, people make politicians pay. But then you can say, but then congressional districts are changed. You really want to get down into it. I have enough problems trying to follow the Middle East, let alone the East Coast of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you for that speech. It was wonderful. What do you think is the future of Netanyahu?
He'll get older. He's a great politician. He knows levers. He knows political pressure. He knows how to make coalitions. He knows how to reward his allies. The other side of the question is, how will those who oppose him organize? Will they stay, at 6 different parties, or will 5 of the people bury their egos? We know if a member of the Labor Party prior to the last election had decided to create a coalition with another party, then the votes that were thrown away that went to the Labor Party would not have been allocated to the Likud. And as a consequence, he would not have been able to create the Bear Coalition and then create a larger coalition. But we forget that head of the Labor Party really messed up. She really messed up. And we as historians, we tend to forget that those were forks in the road. And it's the road not taken. So I don't know how the Israeli politicians will behave. I mean, there are going to be two major blocks, ostensibly, maybe three. And 2026, November 2026 is only a year away. So what is the memory of the 2-year Hamas-Israel war when you get to be June, July of 2026? And will Israeli elections be held before or after the American midterms? In other words, whose tail is being used? I can ask the question, but I'm not smart. I mean, I could ask GPT, but sometimes it's fun to do that, by the way. Oh, wait, did you have a hand up?
We had the mic somewhere?
The mic come your way? Oh, go ahead, sir. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
No, I'm sorry.
Maybe a better question for a historian. Can you help me understand and give me some hints on how to respond to a 25-year-old Jewish, actually European, 25-year-old Jewish European about settler colonialism?
Sure. How much time you got?
You need to take my class.
As much as you want to give me.
How much time? All right.
Send them to my class, and I'm happy to.
All right.
He's in Paris. He's at the Sorbonne.
So the origins of the settler colonial identity placed on the state of Israel the origins of that comes from Yasser Arafat. Arafat decided that in the late 60s and early 70s, I don't think he did it, but I think others around him did it, that the analogy to Israel's existence was exactly the same as what the Algerians did in North Africa, particularly in...
French did in Algeria.
What did I say? The Algerians, the French.
French in Algeria.
The French in Algeria. And the notion was that the Jews came in and they overthrew the elite. They came in and they ripped the land away from the local population. They were not indigenous to this area, and it only started from 1918 or forward. Now, those are three of the 6 or 7 ideas that are tossed out about settler colonialism. The Zionists bought the land that they used. They did not toss out the elite. The elite was exactly what the British wanted, and the British used that elite to rule in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and the Palestinian Arab elite were delighted by the British embrace of their legitimacy. And Zionism purchased 1/4 of all the land that it had in its possession in 1948. It had purchased it by 1917. Now, people say the Balfour Declaration started modern Zionism in terms of colonialism or settlerism. Not true. I mean, I'm sorry, I spent hundreds of hours in the Jewish National Fund archives and in the Israel State Archives reading documents. The key accountability for the state of Israel, or a major accountability for the state of Israel, rests with Arabs who lived in Palestine who sold to incoming Zionists. If they hadn't collaborated, there wouldn't have been a Jewish state. I can say that emphatically. I can show the evidence in Arabic. I can show the evidence in Hebrew. The fact that it's said on the internet, the fact that it's argued in doctoral theses, or it's in chapters of books, doesn't make the myth accurate. And if the 25-year-old wants additional information, take my email address and I'd be glad to give you a 4 or 5 page summary of what I just said in a much more articulate fashion. Ken Stein at israeled.org. Thank you.
That really is his email address. We have time for one last question.
Great, I'm glad it's me. Thank you, Professor Stein, for your talk. It was excellent. So I wanted to ask about, we've talked about the radicalization of Palestinians, and certainly since October 7th and before, Palestinians have been radicalized. But I also want to ask about the radicalization of Israelis after October 7th. Just to pull up, this is a poll I saw recently that was somewhat shocking, is that 82% of Israeli Jews support the transfer of residents of the Gaza Strip to other countries. Another example of something I think quite concerning this is a Haaretz poll, for, citizens of Israel. A majority of 56% of Jews support the transfer of Arab citizens of Israel to other countries. And 47% say when conquering an enemy city, should the IDF act in a manner similar to the way the Israelites acted when they conquered Jericho under the leadership of Joshua, namely to kill all its inhabitants. That is 47% of Israelis.
Can you give me the date of the survey?
Yeah, sure. That was, hold on. June 3rd, 2025.
June 2025.
Yeah.
Right? And can you tell me the source of the survey?
Haaretz. Haaretz.
Haaretz. The newspaper.
Haaretz.
Yeah. So, sorry, to continue my question, so like with the radicalization, which I mean, maybe you disagree that they're radicalized, but I wonder, and given the sort of ascendancy for, I think as you say, sort of fork in the road reasons, as well as the radicalization of Israelis, the rise of the far right in Israeli politics, how do you see the future of Israel living with the Palestinians? And again, sort of to your point earlier about their inability of, as you say, the societies to live side by side, how do you see the future of Israel sort of without, I mean, again, given the ascendancy of this opinion, ethnic cleansing of Arabs from Israel and, Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank?
It's a good question. I think if you ask you ask the same group of people 10 days after the hostages are released, you might find a different kind of outlook. I don't know whether this was before or after the attack on Iran. I think
June, so before.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know when in June. June 11th is June 11th. I don't know if it was after or before. So the reason the reason I asked that. Polling data done of Israelis in 2 years before October 2023 showed a bare minimum of Israeli majority, maybe 53%, who were, quote, not opposed to a two-state solution. I was very careful about the words I chose. I think it's fair to say, and I don't have any evidence, it's just my own sense. I have a feeling that in June of 2025, emotions in Israel were pretty raw. I don't know. The polling data has got to be seen over a period of time and looked at the intervening variables that may have had an impact. I'm not doubting the polling data. I would like to see 2 or 3 other polls that were done at the same time in addition to Haaretz, because I've always had a view, at least for the last 15 years, that Haaretz has been a newspaper that has been at least to the left, if not far to the left, in the Israeli political scene. Right? It certainly is not centrist. Its writers are certainly not centrist. And I don't think anyone would disagree. It's like saying, I don't think anyone would disagree with me that says the New York Times coverage of the Hamas-Israel war was tilted toward Hamas. I mean, just how many times did you have front page pictures on the New York Times, in the New York Times over 2 years? I don't study this. It's just what I have in my driveway every morning. I think Israelis in general would like to get on with their lives. I think Palestinians would like to get on with their lives. I think they'd like to send their kids to a good school in Europe or the United States. Not to say you don't have good schools in the Middle East. I mean, here's a product of one, and his dad taught at one, and I studied at one, and
America, not the bad ones in Israel.
well, we studied at great schools in America. We studied at great schools in Israel. Both of us, we were fortunate. We had great teachers. I don't see politics as hard and fast and immovable. I think there's certain aspects of it that are rooted in the political culture. Now, that may not be politically correct to say, but I think there's a certain amount of collectivity and resilience in the Israeli body politic. There's a certain amount of frustration in the part of the Arab body politic. Many of them think that they are inhabitants and not citizens. And that's a phrase that was given to me by the former head of Jordan, King Hussein. He said that to me in an interview. He said, remember, people here are inhabitants, they're not citizens. He said that to me in an interview. Now, whether he thought I'd ever repeat it at Fairfield University, I have no idea. Probably not. But there's some... Hang on a second. There are fundamental principles about this place, about democracy, people's voting, self-determination, determining your own future. As I said earlier, we haven't figured out religion and state yet. I mean, there are lots of questions we still toss around with. You wanted a clarification?
Yes, please.
No, that's no. I think what he had in mind, he said, we're trying to develop a contract between the government and the citizenry and the people who live here. There have to be mutual obligations between the ruled and the ruler, like we have in the United States, ostensibly.
So my other...
It has nothing to do, doesn't single out the Palestinians.
Kind of cold. The only ideology that
You know, you're asking a wonderful question, and we don't have time tonight, and I don't want to dismiss you out of hand because it's impolite. Palestinian national identity has evolved over the last 100 years. It started much later than Jewish national identity. And one of the reasons it didn't succeed against Zionism is because it wasn't yet mature by 48. It hadn't yet matured, and there were too many cracks in its elements. It's a whole different socioeconomic background, and I'm surprised 77 years after Israel's creation that the Palestinian Arab national movement still hasn't crystallized into a semi-independent, autonomous identity that has a flexibility that can speak for a consensus. I recently listened to two Palestinians who were interviewed in a podcast run by the Middle East Institute in Washington. Two of them work on the West Bank. Two of them were very articulate, and they said, our problem is, even if we wanted to create a political entity today, we don't know who that would be, and we don't have the leadership. And these are articulate 30 to 40-year-olds. These are not radicals of the left or radicals of the right.